So my intention today was to film making applesauce for you guys because I feel like so many people on social media and YouTube are doing it the hard way. And I am able to process all of these apples into applesauce with very little effort. So I want to show you my method. But in reality, there's another project that I really need to tackle. And I debated whether I was going to take you guys along for that or not, but I thought it might also be helpful. So today I'm tackling two projects. I'm going to make applesauce, and if you're here just for the applesauce recipe, I will leave that timestamp below. But the other project I'm going to tackle is my basement. And as someone who teaches organizational skills and considers myself a pretty organized person, it has gotten extremely bad, and it is very embarrassing, to be honest. So I'm definitely putting myself out there and sharing how bad it's gotten. And I could go and make a bunch of excuses about why it has gotten so bad. For example, I was on bed rest at the beginning of this pregnancy, and I could go on and on. But in reality, I know why it got so bad. And that is because we own too much inventory, too much stuff. And no matter how much I would organize it, it would just get cluttered and messy again and completely out of control. I was unable to go downstairs for quite a long time because of this pregnancy that's now going well. But after I went down there, I realized this is too much stuff, especially for my kids to be managing, and honestly, even for me to be managing. So today I'm going to tackle making applesauce and also take you along as I do some serious decluttering and organizing in the basement. This past weekend, I did get started just finding the floor. It was so bad, I couldn't even think straight down there. So I did some laundry and I sorted things and just got it back to where it felt manageable. And now I'm going to go and start going through the decluttering process and just getting rid of stuff. But before I go work on that basement, I am going to get these apples cooking because that is the first step in my applesauce method.
If you're new here, I'm Stacy, homeschooling and homesteading mama of 7, on a mission to ditch the grocery store and become more self-sufficient. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about our journey and how we were making that dream come true. One more thing before we get started. I will start by saying that you will need one piece of equipment to do this method, but I promise you that if you do any preserving, you will get so much use out of it and be so happy with the investment. I use mine for tomato sauce and pear sauce in addition to applesauce, but you can do pumpkin puree or other things too. You can find this exact one on Amazon, which I will link below. I actually misplaced this spring on mine, and I have to use my friend's today, but the newer ones work a lot better and waste less, so I definitely recommend grabbing a newer one. And the spring was easily ordered online and will be here in a few days. Unfortunately, a few days too late for this project. Okay, on to cooking the apples. To cook the apples, I pull out anything that cooks, so as many pans as I can fit in my ovens, a roaster, my slow cooker, and actually I should have used my Instant Pot too, but I forgot. Line any with foil that need it. This roaster pan doesn't have a great coating, so the foil is actually the safer option. I know not everyone is okay with foil, and that's fine. We're going to cover the pans with it too, but if you have a different preferred option, go ahead and do that, just so that they are tightly covered. After all of our pans are set out and ready to fill, we're just going to quarter the apples. I do remove stems too, but don't worry about seeds or peels. The sauce maker takes care of all of that. So just chop the apples and toss them into your pans. As I go along, I will occasionally stop and add a little lemon juice and mix it in with the apples. Honestly, this didn't end up mattering much this time because I ended up cooking the apples a little long and they browned anyway, but if you're going for a light colored, more fresh looking sauce, then you will want to treat all of the apples with either lemon juice or a product called Fruit Fresh. Then before we cook the apples, I just put an inch or so of apple juice in the bottom of each pan. This both helps to keep them from burning and also ensures that your sauce isn't too thick. So let's chat about cooking the apples and the two different ways you can do this. You can either make a light colored, more fresh tasting applesauce, or you can make a more cooked, deeper tasting applesauce. We honestly like both versions, so I don't worry about it one way or another, but if you have a preference, The temperature that you cook the apples will determine that outcome. So for a light colored applesauce, you will cover and bake the apples at a very low temperature, around 200 Fahrenheit, for a few hours or until you can poke a fork through the apples. For a more cooked applesauce, you can bump up the temperature to 300 or 350 for a few hours. And honestly, I don't watch the time. I just pull them out whenever they are cooked and I feel like getting back to the project. While my apples are cooking, I'm going to work on my basement disaster. I'm going to give you a quick peek at what it looked like last week when I finally felt up to starting in on this project. I think one of the main reasons it got so bad was that I had been continually telling the kids, go put that in the basement or the laundry room as a way to deal with items I didn't have time for finding a permanent home for, or projects I couldn't complete at that time. It became a massive waiting zone. The other issue is that my kids had way too much inventory to manage on their own down here. Too many toys, too many clothes, and while they did originally have a place they belonged, it became overwhelming too quickly. Of course, the fact that there was no adult oversight down here for 6 months didn't help either. My laundry pile looks really bad, but to be honest, it's only been a week or so since I was completely caught up. Obviously, we have too much clothes for us to manage as well. My purpose in sharing this embarrassing situation is to hopefully help anyone who is in a similar situation or simply wanting to do a little decluttering make a plan for tackling what can feel like an overwhelming situation. While this mess is horrendous, I knew right from the start what needed to be done and that it wouldn't take me long to get things under control. I also had a good idea of what would keep this from happening again. It was just a matter of doing the work. So let's tackle this together and I'll share my strategies. I started right away with getting caught up on the laundry and doing a quick session of sorting and putting things away as best we could. This probably took us 2 hours total and made a huge impact, relieving a lot of the stress and definitely giving me the motivation to continue today. I knew that this was not going to be a long-term solution, but that thinking straight wouldn't be possible without this step. If you have kids, I have found the best success with being in charge of gathering and sorting and then having kids be the runners. Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming for them to just start putting stuff away. I also really had to be the one to do a lot of the decision making. There were a lot of put off projects or items that didn't have homes that needed dealt with. If you're wondering about the mini cardboard boxes, that is all inventory for a product I'm working on. And yes, I need a better storage solution than my basement, so I am working on that. Today, we still have Mount Laundry, but at least it's Mount Clean Laundry as I continually do loads, and then kids are in charge of coming down and grabbing their items as I go. Tonight, we'll all come tackle this together and get the remaining items put away. The playroom is picked up now aside from my boxes of inventory, and then the toy cupboard is now packed full and in need of some serious downsizing and organizing, but at least I can now focus in on smaller areas at a time. When we originally put these toy cupboards down here, my thought was that I was going to put magnetic locks on the cupboards so that especially the little kids couldn't just go open the cupboards and make a huge mess. And also when we had company, they wouldn't be able to just open the cupboards and get everything out. So that is definitely going on my to-do list as well. The big boys have been given instructions to do their best in the laundry room. I have found that the more hidden storage areas are often where the problem lies. It's when these rooms start spilling over or become hoarding areas that the rest of our home becomes cluttered. Also, very functional rooms like a laundry room are important for mental peace and clarity. I know that getting this laundry room clean is going to feel so good and impact the rest of my declutter process. Step 1 is going to be getting the floor clean. I've even pre-treated, sort, and pulled out the rest of the laundry loads so that they aren't hindering my ability to think straight in this room. As I clean off surfaces and as I clean off the floor, I'm actually going to scrub things down. I don't know why, but mentally this is super helpful to do before going back and dealing with the details or moving on. I think it boosts your motivation when it feels like you have accomplished so much already. Okay, now it's time to deal with the not so easy pile. These things are mostly here because I couldn't bear to get rid of them or I really didn't know what to do with them. These are all those projects for another day, like clothes I planned to mend or things I had good intentions of getting to. My strategy here is having 4 bins. 1 for things to donate or sell, 1 for garbage, 1 for stuff that belongs in a different room and just needs brought there. I also normally would have a bin for items that I'm not sure if I can get rid of to be put in storage for 6 months as a trial run. But honestly, I'm 7 months pregnant and in a mood to just get rid of things, so I'm going to skip that step for now. I may use it in other more sentimental areas of my home. Instead, I have a bin for things I just honestly don't know what to do with. I'm going to tackle these things last, but still find them permanent homes. It's just that doing so is a lot easier with everything else cleaned up and put away. I'm going to do my best to find everything a home, but I'm hoping in the later step of decluttering, things will get moved around a bit and fit better. Okay, this room is already looking so much better, but I know very well that it won't stay this way unless I deal with the stuff problem. So now I'm going to go back and deal with each cupboard and area one at a time and be ruthless. I'm super motivated by knowing that I don't want it to get this bad ever again. Now, don't get me wrong, decluttering and organizing is not a one and done process. As I have learned over the past year, remember this was spotless and completely organized a year ago. But keeping on top of owning less stuff is going to be the magic, or at least that's the thought here. I will keep you updated on my journey towards minimalism if anyone is interested in that. One thing I noticed that I had way too much of and no good storage solution for was extra sheets and bedding. I really debated on this because I feel like it's been drilled into my head that you should have 2 sets for each bed. Well, with 8, soon to be 9 beds in the house, that's a lot. And in reality, I don't ever switch the sheets. I just wash them and put the same ones back on. So I actually decided to make sure everyone has one good set, keep one extra for our guest bed, and got rid of the rest. Another area of stuff that was really hard for me in this room was my craft items. And I think it's because in my mind, I'm going to have a ton of time in my future organized, perfect life where I will just sit and sew, and I'm going to be disappointed if I get rid of the stuff. And to be completely frank, I have a bad habit of buying sewing patterns and fabric with really good intentions. I had someone tell me something a little while ago that has stuck with me, and what she said was that it wasn't an issue of time. I think I said something along the lines of, I just don't have time to sew right now. But she mentioned that if I didn't sew or craft, it was because it was clearly not a priority in this season of life. And she was right. I have time. I just choose to spend it in other areas of my life. So I have 2 choices. I can decide that it really is a priority and my current life isn't aligning with those priorities and then make changes accordingly. Or I can make peace with the fact that it really isn't a priority in my life right now and get rid of this stuff, both so that I can better focus on what is important to me right now and clear away the mental guilt and stress that comes from hanging on to these items. I'm taking this thought process and teaching my kids to go through this same mental process so that we can clear out their craft stuff to just the things they are truly excited over and have time for as well. My decision in this was that I actually do want to prioritize teaching my kids to sew and doing some sewing myself, but that I realistically won't do it often. So what I've decided to do is pick a limit to how much space I'll allow this to take up, and anything that doesn't fit has to go. And I think you can apply this strategy to anything. And of course, everyone's limit is going to look different. My 2 shelves of fabric probably looks like overkill for some, and others probably couldn't even consider reducing their stash that much. I'm also thinking that I'm going to give myself a time limit to get through a lot of this. So I've made an agreement with myself that if I don't get to much sewing by next summer, I need to get rid of at least half. In other areas where there is less mental stress, but I'm just hanging on to items I think maybe I'll want someday, I'm going by the 10 months and $10 rule. If I haven't used it in 10 months and it costs less than $10 to replace, it goes. This obviously doesn't work for everything. I definitely got rid of other items as well, but at least it took away the decision fatigue for a lot of the little stuff. I also noticed when going through this stuff that when you have too many things, you actually forget what you own and end up just buying the item when you need it again anyway. Less stuff is going to allow us to better keep track of what we do own and actually put it to use. Well, I'm pretty happy with how much we got done today down here. I know I have a long way to go, but seeing the progress is very motivating, and I'm hoping to get this basement completely clean and organized before this baby makes his arrival. We'll see how that goes. All right, time to go finish up the applesauce project. Okay, so all of our apples are fork tender, so now it's time to pull them all out and let them cool just a bit while I get the sauce maker set up. In hindsight, I cooked these apples a little too long, but it will still make amazing sauce. But don't worry, if light applesauce is your thing, that's totally doable with the cooking method I described earlier. Next, we're going to scoop the apples into the top of the sauce maker and start turning. These things are pretty easy to turn, but there are electric options, or there are people who use a drill to turn their manual version. If I get tired, I usually just ask kids to come help, and they actually enjoy taking turns doing it. As the sauce maker turns, it spits out beautiful sauce out one end, and then the seeds and peels come out another. Now, I will say that this older model had a lot of waste, and I actually ended up taking a lot of what came out of the seed and peel hole and putting it back through a second time to make sure I was getting as much out of it as possible, but I don't find that I have that waste issue with my newer one. As the sauce bowl fills up, I just dump it into a big pot. One thing to mention here is that you want to pay attention to your sauce to juice ratio and make sure that you're happy with the consistency as you go. You can add more juice or leave the juice in the pan and just scoop in the apples to adjust this. And this is way easier than having to make adjustments later. If your sauce does end up too thin, two solutions are to pour it into a big crock pot and let it simmer until it thickens up, or what I think is much quicker is to just put it through a sieve, removing the amount of juice to your liking. Ideally though, your sauce is going to come out perfect straight from the sauce maker and you won't have to mess with that extra step. After you've gone through all of the apples and your consistency is how you want it, there are just a few steps left to get it canned and on the shelf. In fact, if you are totally new to canning, this is a great first project. First, get your water bath canner filled up about halfway, and then set your clean quart-sized jars in the rack above the water to heat up. Now, if you don't actually have a water bath canner, you can just use a large pot and put some canning lids on the bottom just to hold the jars off the bottom of the pot, and that works just fine too. Also, make sure you have a lid for that pot. At the same time, you can start heating up the applesauce with the goal of having the applesauce, the jars, and the water in the canner all about the same temperature. Once everything is heated up but not quite boiling, go ahead and ladle the applesauce into the jars, leaving about 1/2 inch to the top of the jar. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, I never add sugar to my applesauce. I know that some people do. You can add sugar to your liking. And then I used to add cinnamon to some of my jars, which you can do as well, but we just decided it's easy enough to add the cinnamon later. Okay, so then take a spoon or your measuring tool and remove any air bubbles. Finally, wipe the rims clean and then add lids and bands. Don't screw them too tight. You should be able to easily unscrew it. Add the jars to the canner, put on the lid, and bring the water to a boil. As soon as the water comes to a boil, set your timer for 20 minutes. If you are above 1,000 feet in elevation like me, add 5 minutes to that time. When the timer goes off, turn off the heat and remove the lid. Let it cool for 5 to 10 minutes before removing the jars. And then all that's left to do is to let them sit for at least 12 hours before removing the bands and storing. Well, I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If homesteading, homeschooling, and homemaking are of interest to you, make sure to subscribe.